Picture this: the world's richest superpower, bone dry, staring north to Canada, not for oil but for water. And for the first time, Canada's answer is no. Today, we unravel the quiet war for North America's water. You'll see why a single refusal at the border shook US politics and why that tremor is still rippling through new tariffs and diplomatic storms. We'll explore the strange new leverage of water, the design and breakdown of cross-border agreements, and what happens when resource security collides with political spectacle. Here's a question before we get into it. In a crisis, should nations treat water like a market commodity, a sovereign right, or a shared trust? What would you sacrifice to secure your future? I'll circle back to this in the end. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Water has always flowed quietly across borders until someone tries to turn it off. Let's be honest, most of us grew up thinking of water as almost invisible. We've had that luxury. You open the tap, it's there. Lakes and rivers aren't supposed to make headlines. But a few months back, the whole mood shifted, especially in the drought-racked American West. Suddenly, water wasn't just something you worried about if you lived on a farm, it was the stuff of political speeches. And then came President Trump, always the man with a dramatic gesture. He offered Americans a solution you could almost see on a map. Not desalination plants, not rationing or new technology, but a promise that the answer was waiting just over the border. Canadian rivers. A very large faucet, he said. Simple enough, turn the handle and salvation would just flow south. Except, as you might guess, reality is rarely that obedient. Ottawa's response wasn't a diplomatic dance or a muddled compromise. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney, someone more familiar with the inner workings of banks and border standoffs, just said no. Not a loud no, not a theatrical no, just calm, final refusal. Canada's water is not for sale. What's fascinating to me is that the moment should have passed. Leaders say wild things, borders don't actually move, and everyone goes back to their regular programming. But that is not what happened. Instead, as Trump was doubling down on tariffs, steel, lumber, vehicles, you name it, you all know this by now, he quietly introduced a new variable into the mix: water. The message to Ottawa was very pointed. If you think your rivers are off the table, think again. And the message back, almost understated: Canada's sovereignty isn't for sale either. This was bigger than a squabble about pipes and treaties. For decades, the US and Canada ran on quiet agreements together. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, the Columbia River Treaty, these were the rules of the road, the background noise of prosperity. Suddenly, all of that was up for debate, and the quiet trust that defined the border, almost overnight gone. If you want to support this kind of analysis, there's a Ko-fi link below. Every contribution helps. I'm also writing a book on how to think clearly in a world that often doesn't want you to. If that sounds like something you'd want to read, there's a sign-up list in the description. The idea of weaponizing water sounds melodramatic until you realize that the US has done it before, and not just abroad. In California's Central Valley and Arizona's chit fabs, water is survival and not just an amenity. 40 million people depend on the Great Lakes, millions more on rivers like the Columbia River. When Trump floated the idea of diversion, pipes, dams, treaties rewritten, he wasn't just negotiating, he was reframing water as a strategic asset, on par with rare earths or oil. But the problem is that you can't exactly embargo rain. Ottawa's refusal sent shockwaves through American agriculture and industry. Farmers had bet their crops, their livelihoods on the premise of extra supply. Semiconductor plants, manufacturing lines, hydroelectric utilities, all running calculations on assumed access. When the answer came back no, the shortfall hit like a drought itself. Layoffs, rationing, even whispers of relocation, all sorts of economic pain. And this wasn't just a boardroom problem. All at once, the cracks began to show in places far from Ottawa or Washington. In California's farm towns, growers faced a season of uncertainty, hearing politicians promise relief that was now evaporating. In small towns along the border, people started to wonder what other quiet agreements might unravel next. In Detroit and Cleveland, manufacturing planners began to sketch out risk maps, not for floods, but for shortages. And at the same time, you could feel the shock register on a different level. A national self-image wrestled. For decades, America created Canadian resources almost like an insurance policy, something you keep in a drawer and forget about it until you actually need it. Carney's refusal wasn't just a policy book. It was a reminder that neighbors, even friendly ones, have their own bottom lines. Suddenly, the US realized that a safety net is only as reliable as the hands holding it, and sometimes those hands can let go. If you're enjoying this, I'd love it if you subscribe. The House of L is a community of thoughtful, curious people, and you're very welcome here. The Columbia River Treaty, signed in 1961, was once a model of cross-border pragmatism, balancing flood control and hydroelectric profits. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement held back the pollution of two industrial giants. For decades, these were the quiet, sturdy plumbing of North American prosperity. Trump's move froze negotiations, leaving decades of environmental and energy cooperation in limbo. The treaties didn't just guarantee water, they guaranteed predictability. The new logic is not about negotiation, but about leverage. If you won't give, we'll take elsewhere or impose costs. For U.S. consumers, that means higher grocery bills, rising energy prices, and fresh volatility for everything from cars to electronics. The new data on U.S. inflation is actually just in. Please check out this video for further details on that one. There's also a strange irony here that the stability those old treaties provided was invisible until it vanished. Water agreements aren't the sort of thing you toast at state dinners or debate on talk radio, yet take them away and suddenly everything feels more fragile. Investors began to watch reservoir levels instead of stock charts. Mayors in cities like Buffalo got urgent phone calls from Washington asking questions nobody thought would even matter. A whole region wakes up to the reality that the basic bargains of peace and plenty are easier to break than anyone would have thought. For Canadians, the shock is subtler but deeper. This is not just about water, it is about independence. By framing water as untouchable, Carney tapped into an old, sometimes dormant Canadian suspicion that prosperity is only as secure as your resolve to defend it. In Parliament and on the prairies, this is less about drought in California and far more about a line in the snow. And on the ground, the fallout moves quickly. American farmers eye their shrinking allocations, factories consider layoffs, utilities burn more coal just to keep the grid humming. Ordinary people on both sides start asking questions they never expected to face. How long can we count on the things we once took for granted? The border, so often a symbol of quiet, is suddenly recast as a stage for high drama, uncertainty, and brinkmanship. It would be comforting to imagine this was just another Trump-era drama, brief, noisy, and ultimately forgettable. But it isn't, unfortunately. The aftershock has already spread well beyond Ottawa and Washington. You can almost feel the shift in the background noise of international relations. Water security suddenly is something investors track as closely as oil prices. European diplomats are quietly updating their trade playbooks, penciling in clauses for hydro sovereignty. Across the Pacific Ocean, Asian economies, especially the ones already haunted by drought, are quietly reaching out to Canada hoping for future assurances. Even Canada, always alert to a resource opening, has started sending out subtle signals through its financial networks. It's one of those moments where the headlines only tell part of the story. Beneath the surface, the rules of the game are changing. There is an old lesson here, and it is resurfacing. Treat treaties as temporary, and the balance of power shifts, not with tanks on borders, but with spreadsheets, legalities, and contracts. Canada, once cast as the quiet junior partner, suddenly finds itself in the unexpected role of gatekeeper, a water power with choices. Each time Ottawa refuses a demand or tightens its legal grip on a river, it's not just defending a resource, it is sending a firm message. The era of automatic compliance is over. For the United States, this new reality stings in ways that are both practical and psychological. The embarrassment isn't just about losing access to water, it's about losing a sense of certainty that's been baked into American planning for generations. Yes, industries can usually find ways to adapt to higher costs, most eventually do, but instability, that is a much harder problem. It doesn't show up neatly on a quarterly report, but it does creep into boardrooms, city halls, and kitchen tables all the same. In this new era, the US can no longer assume that simple geography, just being next to Canada, will make cooperation inevitable. And while this all might sound a bit abstract, the effects land in ordinary lives. A factory worker in Michigan, a farmer in California, a family in Phoenix paying just a little more for groceries and power. Each is living out the consequences of a diplomatic standoff that feels both distant and intimate. The biggest changes often arrive quietly, not as breaking news, but as a series of subtle adjustments. And when they do, you realize the map isn't what it used to be. So, should water be a commodity, a sovereign asset, or a shared trust? Perhaps the answer is less about the resource than the story a nation tells itself. This standoff foreshadows a deeper shift, one that recent tariffs and trade spats had only intensified. In refusing, Canada made itself visible in a new way as a country that knows what it will not surrender even to its closest ally. Water can be traded, hoarded, or protected, but only at the price of something else, as always. Trust, stability, or the illusion of control, every choice is a trade off. The world is watching, not just because rivers flow downhill, but because power, real durable power, flows in all directions. From here, the rules of engagement in North America and beyond will be written not just by Washington, but in Ottawa, Brussels, and even Beijing. If you want more on how alliances shift or why resources like water and energy and aluminium are reshaping global deals, there's a deep dive link below. The next decade won't just be about pipelines and tariffs, but about who gets to write the story of survival. Until next time, stay curious, keep your arguments nuanced.